Hi everyone, welcome to our first workshop for this semester. My name is Angelo Aspris and I'm your lecturer, but also the coordinator of the course, and I'm also giving the workshops this semester. These workshops are pre-recorded, and so available to you on Canvas. What I'm going to do today is we're going to go through the first of our workshops, which entails how we construct a financial statement. Really what we're going to go through today is how we take raw data and how we format it so that it's in a format that is conducive to be able to conduct evaluation analysis. Now, this is the spreadsheet that I've uploaded onto Blackboard, rather Canvas. You can see that the spreadsheet has multiple tabs, cover, which is just I guess, a cover sheet for a spreadsheet. And any sort of model that is usually created typically comes with a cover sheet, which is constructed by the author of that particular model. And the purposes of a cover sheet are to introduce the reader or the participant that's sharing that spreadsheet with what the author intends to do. And in this case, you can see we've got a Think 3015 workshop model. So this tells you as the reader, as the person that's accessing this particular worksheet, or workbook rather, that this is going to be about JB Hi-Fi. It's going to be about taking financial data and creating a forecasted model, or rather a model that's forecasting the financials of the firm in order to conduct evaluation. There are also there's a legend here, the purposes of which is to identify what the different cells mean, and in particular, what the different colors mean. So we've got black, blue, green, and assumptions, and these are sort of typically used to just distinguish between what we're doing in different cells. And again, this will become clearer to you as we go throughout the workshop. Now, in today's class, the task is pretty simple. Firstly, we're going to take this particular spreadsheet, which is just an income statement of raw data, and we're going to format it so that we achieve something like this. Now, there is a third tab, which is called Formatted with Comments. And the purposes of this is just to provide you with a selection of shortcuts and just some comments about why we're doing certain things and how we're doing it. But before we get started, I thought a sort of question I think that becomes important when you're conducting evaluation analysis, although maybe not for your first case study or even second case study, is, well, where does this data come from? Are we sort of just taking this information from the annual report and then just manually typing this information in to these Excel cells? The answer to that is no, we're not. Anytime that we spend manually inputting cells is wasted time. So there's got to be a better way of doing that. And so what I want to do initially is I want to bring you to a range of different sources of information. Now, the information that we have that has been sourced to that particular spreadsheet comes from Capital IQ. And Capital IQ is a database that contains all sorts of information, but specifically, it is it's a source of wealth rather for company financials. And so, for example, with your company Playside Studios, which is the basis of your first case study, this, just a bit slow because I haven't logged in. Okay, it's not behaving, but we're gonna get there. Okay, so if I wanted to get some financial information around Playside Studios, you can see I've just typed in Playside. I have the market entry for Playside, PLY, and then you can see all the information that I can source around this particular firm. Now, of interest to us in this particular worksheet or workshop rather, is financials or valuation data, and specifically income statement data. And you can see once I click on income statement data, I've got a wealth of data that's populated from all the way from entry through to basic earnings per share, and there's a range of other supplemental information that goes with this. And you can see by sort of scrolling through these tabs, I go from the income statement to the balance sheet to the cash flow statement, and there's also ratios and supplemental data. Now, if I go back to the income statement, you can see that each one of these accounts has supplementary information. So that's perhaps not a good case, but if I click on cost of goods sold or SGA, you can see there are sub-accounts to SG&A. For example, the employee benefit expense, marketing expenses, and some general administration expenses. And depending on the level of information that is provided by the firm, the accounts can be expanded and drilled into. The other thing that's quite novel is the ability to click on an account. As you can see, they've just clicked on revenue for 2018, and then I can click through the sales information, which will take me to the actual physical annual report, or rather the digital annual report. So I can see where exactly this number has been sourced from. So this is the annual report for 2019. And if we perhaps type in revenue, we can work all the way through until we find that particular number, which has been used in this Capital IQ database. So these are all kind of useful things with Capital IQ. To get sort of familiar with it, you've got to play around with it, but that's just a basic look at PlaySite and how information can be pulled out. There's a variety of things here. You know, you can shorten the time frame. So if you want only from 2020 to 2023 in terms of financial years, you could do that. You can switch the order from left to right, as in 2020 to 23. Instead, have it right to left. You can switch the periods from annual to quarterly. So most companies report on a quarterly basis, and you can get information supplied to you on that basis. So there are a range of things here. You know, if you're comparing companies that are across different continents, then the other thing that you might want to consider is that here everything is expressed in Australian dollars. And so if you've got different companies, you might want to express them all in the same currency. A common currency could be US dollars, it could be Australian dollars, but these are sort of considerations that we can get into next time. Now, the other source of data that would be available to you can be accessed through the University of Sydney Library. And you can see here that I've already loaded the webpage for the Sydney University Library. It's kind of this new iteration of the Sydney Uni Library webpage is a bit harder to navigate than the previous one. But essentially, if you browse through to the business section and the business databases section and select finance, these are a range of databases that you have access to just by being a student at the university that allows you to access particular data. Crunch-based data is good for startups or PE stuff. Connect4 is a useful source of information about capital raisings and company takeovers. And Data Analysis Premium is kind of useful for us with respect to getting data about firms, so financial information data. And you can see here, there's a range of information initially on the splash screen about market-sensitive announcements, trades that directors are involved in. Again, if I just type in PLY, the stock code for PlaySide Studios, which is case study 1, hit search, then click on the stock code PLY, we can see some basic information about this firm. Market cap 355, 400 shares outstanding, and a share price of around 87 cents. You can scroll through to key data about the firm. In this case, there's not too much, but the information that we're searching for here is financial data. And again, you've got a nicely drawn up profit and loss statement. You can download the spreadsheet. You can do the same thing with Capital IQ in terms of downloading spreadsheets. There is an icon somewhere here that would allow you to do it. Just not seeing it. Here we go. Download this page or download the financials. That'll download a nice little spreadsheet, which is essentially providing you with information that I already have in the spreadsheet that I've uploaded to you on Canvas this week. And again, this does the same. Click on download spreadsheet and you have access to all this information about profit and loss, balance sheet, and then you can select the duration of the data. Interesting break there, but all the sorts of things that will help you with your forecasts. Okay, final source is financial review. This is probably the worst of the options, but again, if I click on search, type in PLY, you can see it's sort of located the range of articles, but also the company Playside Studios. Once I click on Playside Studios, I can navigate through, price history, financials, analysis, and shareholders. So all sorts of interesting information that might be useful for your model and for your valuation. Now, if we go back to the spreadsheet now, as I said, today's class is not necessarily about understanding the financial information, but more about formatting. And immediately, a question is, why do we need to format? What's wrong with just sort of playing around with these actual numbers as they are? And the bottom line here is that formatting certainly makes your job easier in terms of being able to navigate through a spreadsheet as it becomes more complex. It's also good practice in terms of being able to share your model with someone else and having them understand what you're doing. It's also good in terms of the idea of audit and error detection. So often you need to navigate a spreadsheet to figure out where an error is made. Often you'll have sort of circular arguments involved in your spreadsheet, and being able to wade through the information to unpack that is something that requires good formatting. So there are a variety of reasons for having a well-formatted spreadsheet, what I've just presented you with is just a very simple solution or response for why we might want to do it. Now, you can certainly have your own ways of formatting a spreadsheet. There isn't a defined way of doing things. I guess all I'm going to talk about today is, I guess, good practice. And if you want to make variations on what I'm discussing, for example, there's no reason why this needs to be blue and white typeface. You can change the colors if you prefer. You can change the font if you prefer. So these sort of things are not set in stone. They are a matter of preference, but this is just something nice that you can build upon. You remember that if you did attend the first lecture, I did say we're not trying to recreate things. We're not trying to create things from scratch. We are just trying to build upon what we have. And this is what we have initially. And all we're trying to do is just get it to a point where it looks something like this. So initially, when you do open Excel, and let's say you open a blank sheet in Excel, this is what a blank sheet in Excel looks like. Most of you know and have played around with Excel, so I don't need to familiarize. I don't think you need to go through this sort of level of detail, but if you want to create a new sheet in any particular workbook, simple way to do that is take your mouse down to the bottom corner and hit the plus button. Alternatively, if you press Shift F11, that creates a spreadsheet, and you can see that it's gone from spreadsheet worksheet 3 to worksheet 4 to worksheet 5 and so forth. And so this is just a quick shortcut, and I'll be going through several shortcuts like this that might make your life easy. What you will discover is having these shortcuts is really handy because models can get quite big, both sort of across the columns. You can see we go from column A to column XPD, and we can go from row 1 to basically about 1 million rows down. And so once your model starts incorporating all different bits and pieces, once you start including your cash flow statement, your balance sheet, once you start including alternative models, once you include a relative valuation, these sheets can get quite large. So again, another reason for having good formatting is to ensure that we can build something that is sustainable and easy to navigate. Now, if you want to remove any of these sheets, again, a quick way to do that is just right-click your mouse here and press D, and that is the letter D. You can see that's just removing these different spreadsheets. Now, one of the things you might notice looking at this spreadsheet is that we pretty much, with this spreadsheet as we have it, we have a range of grid lines, whereas this is a much cleaner workspace with no grid lines. So if we wanted to remove grid lines, there is a very simple shortcut to do that. If you press Alt W, let me start that again, Alt W V G, you can see I've removed the grid lines there. So Alt WVG will do that. You don't need to hold them all at the same time. It's just Alt WVG. The alternative is if I go back to having grid lines, if I just go to my formatting. So to get to this screen, this format cell screen, I can either just go right click, format. Alternatively, the shortcut is just Control 1. By hitting Control 1, if I go to fill and I choose white, no, that's not doing it. So format, here we go. You can see, again, I've achieved the same thing. So again, Control 1, fill, white screen, and there go my grid lines. Okay, so let's just go back to this now. We've already got a white screen. We've already removed the grid lines. We don't need to do that. One other thing that can be quite useful in making your life easier when you're sort of engaging in this modeling process is to have some shortcuts. And you can see this toolbar at the very top here has a series of shortcuts that I've already edited. And so for me here, for example, I've got font color, I've got cell fill color, I've got in terms of how many decimal places, I've got something for freezing panes, I've got a note entry. And so all I'm trying to do here, or all I'm trying to express, is that there are a range of different options that you're going to use as you become more familiar with Excel. If, for example, you end up using things like wrapping text quite frequently, well, rather than having to, let's say you're always in review, and then going back to home and then having to go and select this particular option, you'll just right-click that particular option and then add it to the quick access toolbar. And you can see now I've added wrapping text to the quick access toolbar. And no matter what I do, no matter what sheet I go to, no matter what workbook I'm dealing with, that option is always going to be available there for me. The other way to add and to visualize your options is just to go down to options. Here is your quick access toolbar, and then you can add certain things or remove certain things from your quick access toolbar. So having a series of options, which you will find will be different for every person. I like having notes here, but most people don't necessarily have notes or have a use for having notes in their workbooks. So that might not be part of their quick access toolbar. So that will be something that you can personalize. And as you go throughout the modeling process, you'll find that there are different things that you have more of a need for. Now, the next thing that we'll see is that if I go to the Formatted tab, you can see as I scroll down, the one thing that remains constant are these first 5 rows. And what that means, the reason why that has happened is because I've frozen these particular rows. So if I go to the Unformatted tab, that can't be said of these particular rows. As I go further down the screen, I lose that. And the reason why this is useful to have is because, as again, if I'm dealing with a very large model, even if I'm down at row 200, I can still see that the cell here applies to the year 2017.
So my connection seems to have broken, so apologies for any interruptions from the spreadsheet that I had. So my connection seems to have broken, so apologies for that. Now getting back on track, we had this formatted spreadsheet here, and what I was about to get into was that the first thing we might want to do here is we want to freeze the pane. So we had this pane here, which is which is frozen, which I indicated for a variety of reasons is the desirable format. So we're going to do the same thing here. To do this, we'll select where we want this frozen from. And so if we go to view, we go to freeze pane, we freeze the pane from this point. Actually, not quite that point. We want to freeze it from the row after. So everything up until the end of row 4. So we'll select row 5 and we'll freeze that pane. You can see what that does is this creates the division between everything before row 4 and everything after row 4. As you can see up here, I've chosen to add this to my quick bar, and the reason for that is because it is something that is typically utilized in most sheets, whether it is you're freezing the top row or several rows, it does get used a fair amount. So now you can see we've got that same sort of formatting associated with the freezing of the rows. Now, let's just add a little bit of color to this now. So next step is, we kind of like this color. It's sort of the JP Morgan-like blue that's used in their reports. So we might want to take that and just, if we hit Control Space rather, that selects the entire row. We'll select the first 4 rows. If we then press Control Alt V, that allows us to paste special. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to select format, and you can see it's copied across this shade of blue into our unformatted tab. And so this is starting to now look like what we have in the formatted spreadsheet. So the one thing that you might notice that is different between the unformatted and formatted tab, and there are several things obviously, but one is that the income statement column it doesn't begin until column B. And so we've created these columns here, A, B, and C, which are sort of blank columns. And the reason why we've done that is because we are going to use those columns as a way to navigate throughout the spreadsheet. And all I mean by that is that if you see what we've got here, if we continue to go balance sheet, cash flow statement, and then just keep adding things through this, when it comes time to adding our model and it comes time to doing our free cash flows, in order to try and locate something, it's going to be a little difficult. And so one way to improve the way to navigate through your spreadsheet is to firstly, press shift a few too many times. One way to do that is to firstly is to select your first column. So I've here selected column A. Again, a quick shortcut is Control Spacebar, and that selects the column, as opposed to Shift Spacebar, which selects the row. So if I hit Control Spacebar and then hit Control Plus, that just adds additional columns. And so you can see here, I've added 3 additional columns just to sort of replicate what we've got in the formatted spreadsheet. You can, make this as wide as or short as you like. And what we're going to do here is we'll just pick the closest column to the income statement, and then we'll just enumerate the statement. So here we've got 1 for income statement. We'll add a balance sheet at number 2, and we'll make number 3 the cash flow statement. And then you can just keep going. Number 4 might be your free cash flow generation. There are obviously how simple or complex your model is up to you, and we'll get into the complexities of that modeling later in the semester. Now, you can enumerate this through numbers, which is what we've got here in the formatted. What we have here in the formatted tab. Alternatively, what's sort of customary in industry is to use some kind of symbol, and so you might want to use any kind of symbol. Wingdings is one way of just creating these symbols, and you can see that what we now have here means that we can navigate, and to show you this more clearly, to navigate now between your income statement and your balance sheet, rather than going through column D and just scrolling all the way down before you can find your cash flow statement, you can just go to the very top. You can go to column C now, and then go Control Down button. That takes you to your balance sheet. Control Down button now takes you to your cash flow statement. So just an easier way to navigate through the different sheets or the different parts of your sheet in your worksheet. So that's something that we have here in our formatted sheet, and that's again bringing us a little closer to what we have in the formatted sheet. So we've talked about freezing the pane. We've talked about adding some columns. Let's talk a little bit about now some of the formatting. You can see that if I go back to the formatting associated with this text, historical appears in the center, forecast appears here in the center of the forecast years. And so one way you can do that is simply just go copy that across to this. Or that the same thing can be done with the forecast year. What happens here is it's nice and simple because we have 5 years, so the center of it would be the third column. But what happens if you've only got 4 years as opposed to 5 years? What would be a center column? So one way to solve this problem is to format the cell. So to do that, you press Control 1, and this brings the formatting cell uh, navigation box. Alternatively, you can just right-click your mouse, click Format Cells, which brings up the same box, and then you go to the Alignment key or the Alignment tab. Now, there are two ways to center this historical piece of text. One is just go to Merge Cells, which would merge all of these cells, and then you can center that. The alternative is to just go to the text alignment and choose Center Across Selection. And so you can see what that does is it centers the text historical across these 5 columns. And we'll do the same thing with forecast. Now, I'd recommend that you do this in the way that I've just mentioned, as opposed to trying to merge these cells and centering it after you merge the cells. Because the problem with merging cells in Excel is that when your model becomes a lot more complex, if you've got cells that are merged, when it comes time to moving things or referencing things, it requires you to break those cells, and that can cause all sorts of issues with your model. So that's the simplest way to solve that particular problem. Now, if we go back to the Formatted tab, you can see here that the years have been formatted slightly differently, as in rather than having the year numbers 2017, 18, 19, 20, we have fiscal year 2018, fiscal year 2018, and so forth. And the other thing is that you can see that with these years that are lined up with the historical term, they have an A at the end of it, and the A indicating that these are actual numbers as opposed to forecasted numbers. When we have forecasted numbers, we've got an E at the end, reflecting that they are an expectation. So they are based on some kind of assumption that we're going to make about those numbers for the future. So to replicate that, well, one, we could just type in the text. I have something like FY 2017A, and then do the same thing FY 2018A, but then that's sort of a bit cumbersome. So a simpler way to do this is to, again, go and format this individual cells. In this case, we're not concerned with alignment. We want the number. Again, how did I get here? Just Control 1. And then I'm going to go to a custom format. Now, I can try some of these other formats, but understanding how custom formats work is probably beneficial to you over the long term. And so in this case, the simplest way to format this would just be to firstly insert text, and to insert some text, just open some quotation marks, in this case, add FY to indicate that it's a fiscal year. And then after this, we're going to add these hashes, and you can see now already this is what the what it's going to look like, FY 2017. So a hash for each of the integers that we've got here. And then remember, what we want to do is we want to add the letter A to it to represent that this will be an actual year. So once we click OK, you can see we now have our fiscal years provided to us. We'll do the same thing with the next 4 numbers. Okay, so again, custom, and then add the text, add the text, not GY, but rather FY, and then add a couple of hashes. And then in this, for this part of the sample, we're going to add the expectation. So this clearly differentiates between the forecasts that are historical forecasts and the forecasts that represent expectations in our model. Okay, so now we have, again, something that more closely resembles what we have here in the formatted spreadsheet. So just again to sort of bring this closer in line to what we have with the formatted, just moving things around here, not doing anything out of the ordinary. The next thing that we might want to look at is perhaps just this formatting these integers that are contained within the income statement. So at the moment, you can see here it's a bit disorderly. So we want to take all the numbers that are contained within the income statement, and also this additional supplementary information, and we want to format them. And we're going to follow the same kind of format here. Control 1, we're going to go down to custom. You can see this is what the numeric looks like in terms of its current formatting. So we want to change that. And a nice way of formatting would be to employ something like this, where we go hash, we've got a comma. The comma is simply just to insert a comma between the thousands. And then the 0 here indicates that the trailing number will be a 0. And then I'm going to put a period followed by 0, which just indicates that the period that there's a decimal place and there's one decimal place, because I'm preceding the period by 0. If I wanted 2 decimal places, I could just add a second 0. I'm going to follow that with a semicolon and then, or a colon rather, and then I'm going to then add the following. So I'm just open parentheses. I'm going to go hash again and pretty much insert the same thing. And the reason I'm doing this, or the reason I'm adding the parentheses, is because what this is telling Excel is if the number is positive, it should look like this. And if the number is negative, the number should be enclosed within these parentheses. So a positive number is going to appear in a manner that looks like this. If it was negative 5,628, it would look the same, except it would be in parentheses. And then I'm going to go colon again, and then I'm going to put a dash. And so what that's doing, again, it's creating an extra bit of logic that's saying that if you've got a number like 0 that appears, that instead of 0, have it presented as dash. So if I go OK now, you can see the positive number is expressed in this way, the negative number is expressed in this way, and zeros are proxied by these dashes. So again, let's go back to the formatted spreadsheet. Let's take a look at these numbers compared to these numbers. You can see I've formatted it to 1 DP, whereas here it's formatted to 0 DPs. Again, I can just simply select all of that data, go back to home. You can see this increase decimal, decrease decimal button. If I go decrease decimal to center that, I have something again that resembles what is in the formatted tab. So again, I generally like to have this in my quick buttons because it is something that I tend to utilize a fair amount. So that takes care of the formatting of the numbers. What else have we got to focus on? Well, we can see here that there's a line of separation between the historical and the forecast. And that's just a good idea, again, otherwise you've just got numbers carrying all the way through and you don't necessarily know what your forecast is versus what your historical number is. So just having a line of division between your historical and your format can be quite useful to have. So if I just go Control 1, again, take myself down to border. You can see I can insert just like a straight line there across the column, or I can take some perforated line like this. I can change the color just to make it a bit more visible. And then I want to place that line on the outside, or the border on the outside of this column. So I'll be placing it here. And if I go OK, I can see this perforated line that divides the historical from the forecast. If we look at the sheet now, I also want to copy across this legend. And the reason why is that I want to address why we might not like this particular formatting. So you can see here, everything is in black. And if you're dealing with this income statement, that might be fine. But if you start linking different spreadsheets together, if you start growing the spreadsheet such that includes your balance sheet data, your cash flow data, and all the rest of it, then you tend to get into a pretty messy scenario. And so one way to deal with that is to differentiate between cells that are input cells versus cells that are calculation cells versus those that go between the different sheets. So for example, sometimes you might have a sheet that has all your financial data and you might have a separate sheet that has, let's say, all your cost of capital data. And so when you're building your model, you might need to link between the different sheets. So those particular cells that are linked between sheets would be represented as something green. Now you can have your own type of legend, your own color codes, your own different types of things that you code in different ways. There's no reason why it needs to be this exact. You need to follow this exact logic. It's if you want to continue on with it, that's fine because it'll be easier to understand. You don't have to recreate the wheel. So for now, we have here historical data. We've got this is clearly input data because there's no, it's not referring to anything. I can see that $7,095.30. So this would be, for example, something that would be consistent with the legend input that we can just select that color. So we might want to just change the input now, or we can make it a different color. So that's going to be the color of our input. Now, for the purposes of what we have here, everything has just been brought over from CapIQ. So everything here will be an input cell. But at this point, this is not really what we want. What we want to do at this point is that we want to ensure that certain cells that should be calculation cells are indeed that. And so all I mean by that is that revenue and cost of sales for now will be input cells, but gross profit is simply going to be the sum of these two cells, right? And so it was 1231 before, right? That was the original 1230.5. And then if I sum them, you can see it's still the same, 1231. And if I just open this up, you can see it's exactly the same. So all I'm saying here is that for our line items that represent totals or sums, we want to just we just want to ensure that they aren't hard coded. So gross profit is just revenue minus the cost of sales. And we've just calculated that as being the sum of these two cells. And so once you've calculated it for one, you don't need to do the same thing for the second one, right? You don't need to go through and do this for every single column. You can just go select the cell, go to the end of the historical years, and then press Control R. And all that does is it fills the column, it fills the cells to the right. So you can see that every cell now is a calculation, and it's just based on the formula of this particular cell. So again, if I go to the next major column, so I've got gross profit now, then I've got a series of operating expenses, and then I have the column EBITDA. So one way just to figure this out initially is just to bold everything that you think is a total column. So EBITDA, EBIT, pre-tax profit, NPAT, statutory NPAT. So these are all columns. And so with EBITDA, you've got the sum of these columns. You can see again, it's the same. And so I'll go Control R. You can see EBIT will just be the sum of these columns. Again, Control R. Pre-tax profit, again, the sum of And we're just going to follow this all the way through. So these are now your calculation cells. Okay. So what does that mean if we wanted to follow this legend as we have here? We're just going to select the cells that are input cells. Okay, all I've done is I'm holding down the control key and I'm just dragging those cells that represent input cells with my mouse, and then I'm just going to make them blue. So you can see a clear distinction now between the cells that are calculation cells and the cells that are input cells. And I'll just again create more separation by having these in bold. Now you don't necessarily have to have these in bold. I think the formatted has them in bold, but you don't necessarily need to have that. The other thing that you'll need to do is to create, oops, let me just do that again, is just some lines here for the visual effect. And so again, I'm just selecting, the rows where I'm going to create this division. All I'm going to do here is just add top border, and then I'll just create borders for this by selecting a top and bottom border. And you can see that our spreadsheet is now starting to look more like the formatted version. You can see here in the formatted version, they've used a little bit of this sort of blue here to separate the text from the numeric. Again, we can just do that very simply just by doing that, taking the bucket here, choosing a kind of nice blue. You can go to more colors here if you're not happy with that. We might want to select sort of that shade of blue. There is a custom format. So this hex um, variable, there are particular color codes that you might know of, and you can manually input the hex value to apply certain color. In this case, we're just going to keep it simple, and that's again creating this separation between the qualitative input and the numeric input. We've kind of ruined our row here, so let's just, sorry, our column border. So again, I'm just going to reapply the column border. I think we use that kind of red there and made this perforated. Okay, and so that's again looking a little bit more like what we have in our formatted tab. There are certain things that you can do to make your life a little easier. So for example, you might, instead of trying to manually apply these color coding inputs, you can utilize things like conditional formatting. And so you can create rules and conditional formatting such that, if a value, if there's a certain rule that applies to a value that it's color coded, or that it appears as blue. If there's a calculation involved, that it's black. And so you can, rather than having this manual application of the rules, you can have this conditional formatting that just kicks in, such that if a calculation is applied, the cell colors itself to black. Now, I don't mind conditional formatting. It sometimes helps with sheets that I construct, but at times it also fails miserably, particularly where it operates at the intersection of words and numbers. Conditional formatting can fall apart. So you can use it. It might help you, but you have to be wary of the fact that it can cause some issues with your model from time to time. So for now, again, unless you're particularly comfortable with it, I'd steer away from it. When it comes in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at financial statements in a bit more detail. One of the things that is going to help with your forecasting is is firstly going and understanding the type of growth that's associated with certain accounts. So what I mean by that is the first thing you're going to have to try and forecast is what revenue growth might be, let's say, in the year 2022, assuming that 2022 hasn't yet happened. So, this number might be 10,400 or might be 15,000, but how are we going to know? Well, one way you can analyze the future is by understanding what has happened in the past. And so what, again, you might want to think about doing, and this will sort of come from next week and later on, is that if we select the row to begin with, and we just add a new row. So again, to select the row, we'll go Shift space, and then we'll go Control plus, and that just created a new row for us. And what we might want to look at is something like revenue growth. Okay, I'm just going to put that in italics so that we know that this isn't an actual account in the income statement, but rather something that might describe the account. And so all I want to do is I want to look at the revenue growth. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to start the statement with equals, open brackets, and then I'm going to go that minus that cell and divided by that cell. And so this is going to tell me how much revenue growth is on a percentage basis. To convert this is clearly not in a percentage form. So I'm going to go to home and hit that percentage number. And then I want to see it. I want to see it 2DP, and now I can see the revenue growth percentage over this 5-year period. Okay, so it's grown by 21.79%, 3.5% in that year, 11.61% that year, and in FY 2021, there's growth of 12.6%. And so if we want to see what the average of this period is, this 4-year period, it's definitely not 0 because we haven't converted to percentage. So on average, 12.38% for that 4-year period. So in some ways, that might inform the kind of revenue growth that I expect for FY 2022. Okay, so that's sort of how you might organize this particular income statement. And you might want to do that for your gross profit margin and a variety of other accounts. So that's kind of, pretty close to what we have here. Just a few other sort of tips and tricks, I suppose, going through this particular this Excel workbook. You have, and most of you will find that you have an automate tab, which allows you to record particular actions. So if you want, you can record certain actions if it's sort of an action that you're going to repeat over and over again, and you can sort of convert that recorded action to some kind of macro that allows you to repeat the process once you've done it. And so some people find that useful. It's just another way of kind of creating automation in your model without having to program. So, if you're familiar with VBA, it's a way of creating macros within Excel. This is kind of a cheat way to create a macro. Again, if you're not familiar with Excel, I wouldn't worry about it too much, but if you have some familiarity with it, it's definitely something that you might want to consider utilizing for your model. There are certain other things that could be useful for you. So, for example, if we go to data, you'll notice there are things like group or ungroup. Where that might be useful is, if we take a row rather, like something like cost of sales. So I'm just going to get rid of revenue growth for now. I'm going to select that row, and then I'm also going to add a couple of new rows. So what some people like to do is to create different scenarios. So I might create, let's say, a bull scenario, a base case scenario, and a bear case scenario. Okay, it's formatted incorrectly, so I'm just going to have to change the formatting to text. Okay, so there are my scenarios now. And so the purpose of having these scenarios is to present a series of alternatives that might help us with exploring different situations. Now, remember, in valuations, what we're trying to do is trying to make certainty out of uncertainty. And so one way of making certainty out of uncertainty is to model particular scenarios that don't follow the path that we expect. So what might happen in a bull scenario? So if we had that base case scenario where things were growing at, let's call it just around 12.5% per year. So we'll just assume we're predicting as opposed to observing the past just for the purposes of what we're doing. So let me just format this. So in a bull scenario, given that the base case scenario is growth of about 12.5% a year, we might create a bull scenario where things are growing by, let's call it a flat 16% per year. And in a bear case scenario, things are growing by only, let's call it 5% per year. Now, why are we doing this? As I said, we're doing this because what we are looking to do here is to explore how, let's say, free cash flows uh, react in response to a slower revenue growth rate, or how free cash flows might react to faster than expected growth in cash flows. So we're essentially just creating a range of values that are associated with different levels of growth. Now, where does this group thing come in? Well, again, you can see here that we've sort of broken up the income statement between items that actually belong in the income statement versus things that are part of our model. And so what one might do here is to take the group and group these items such that you can see what's created here now is two separate tabs, 1 and 2, that provide you with different level of detail about your spreadsheet. So 1 tells you that you have this revenue, and 2, which is just an expanded version of the group, tells you the different scenarios that are associated with the revenue forecast that you're going to make. Okay, so again, this is something we're going to talk about in greater detail in the next few weeks. But now all I'm simply showing you is a degree of formatting. So don't worry about the scenarios. That's something we'll talk about in like week 5 or 6. But for now, just know that there is a option whereby you can group data just to improve, again, the visibility and readability of your model versus sort of what you have here. Okay, other things that are kind of useful. One thing that I think it's interesting to be aware of is you can see that we've added some calculations to our model. I like this function here called trace precedence or trace dependence, dependent on what it is that you're looking at. And so the point of tracing precedence or dependence is to understand what affects what, like where is the causality in your model. And all I mean by that is that if I take statutory impact cell here and I press to trace the precedence, you can see that there's an arrow that's automatically added to my model where it starts from 204 and it works its way through to here. Let me just do one that I guess that might explain this a bit better. EBITDA, you can see an arrow starts from gross profit, works its way down to EBITDA. And all this is saying is that this particular cell, which says the sum of E12 to E16, is the sum of these particular cells. So why does Excel have this option? Well, again, as models become more complex, as it involves more rows and more columns and more spreadsheets, sometimes it's really hard to navigate between, well, what has gone into a particular cell? How has this cell been calculated and has it been calculated correctly? So the point of having this tracing precedence and dependence option is to allow you to see which cells have been chosen for what calculation. So we can similarly add or remove just by clicking on this particular button. So this is called adding a sort of level of audit to your model. The audit being that like you're reviewing it for any potential errors. And that's one of the sort of audit functions that will become useful to understanding whether you've maintained the integrity of your model. Okay, I guess one other thing I think that just comes to mind now is this, again, back to this options. Um, this will become something that we talk about again in the next couple of weeks, but you can see here that there's this, in this formulas tab, there's a series of options that relate to calculations that are conducted by Excel. Now, we know that basically every time we go equal sum and we hit enter, a calculation is done for us. And that is because we've set the workbook calculation to automatic. If we set the manual calculation, what would happen is every time we hit the enter button, there would be no response. It would require us to manually um, execute by just simply pressing F9 for the calculation to be conducted. Now, a lot of people like to set calculation options to automatic except for data tables, and then to enable the iterative calculation to, let's say, 100 iterations with a very small change. Now, let me explain what this means and why this is important. The reason why a lot of people set this automatic except for data tables is because data tables is a way to conduct sensitivity and scenario analysis, but it's a very because it's a very iterative process. If you start to develop your model and your model gets larger, your Excel spreadsheet, every time you load it, can take minutes to load, just because it's doing these calculations. So if you've got a very big spreadsheet, you don't want to be waiting for minutes for your spreadsheet to load. One way to avoid that is to just set it to automatic and only run your data tables where that iterative calculation is required when you need to do it. And that way you don't have to sit there waiting for minutes for your spreadsheet to open. So this is just a bit of a time saver. Again, I'll explain this idea of data tables in the next few weeks, but just having this option set to automatic except for data tables is probably something that you want to do nice and early on. Apart from that, I think that's more or less what I had scheduled for us to discuss this week. There might be one or two other things that I've left out, and if I do remember them, I'll cover them next week. One thing, maybe just from the point of view of what this all means, you can see that it's important that we always specify what currency it is that we're dealing with. That anyone that picks a spreadsheet wants to know that here we're dealing with Australian dollars and not US dollars. And here we're specifying that the year end, which is what the YE is June year end. And that's important to know because firstly, not all companies have a June year end. That is that their end of year doesn't occur on June 30. Some of them might have a year end of December 31. Whatever it might be, we just need to report it here. So for example, if you're valuing a bank, you can be certain that the June year end is not what the banks report on. Most of them report kind of like a September year end. Ultimately, you just need to find out what it is that your company reports to and just have that reported in your spreadsheet. I think that pretty much covers it. In the spreadsheet that I will upload, the finished one, I'll put up a list of shortcuts, the most utilized shortcuts, and the shortcuts between PCs and Apple are sometimes not the same. For starters, there isn't a control key with Apple. So in some instances, it's just a matter of replacing the control key with the command key, but that isn't always the case. So I've got a link here for you, and that includes some of the Apple equivalents, and that will help you with understanding if it is an Apple that you have a preference for, how to undertake those shortcuts with an Apple machine. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for now. If you have any questions, feel free to post them onto Ed. Ed, as I might have mentioned already, is the forum that both myself and the tutors will be communicating on. So please post your questions to Ed if you have any. For now, that's it. And tune in next week and we'll go through an extension of this particular spreadsheet. We'll add the balance sheet and we'll start talking about how we start to connect up the income statement and the balance sheet. And we'll talk about some more formatting tips then. Okay, bye for now.